Well, I was born in Red Hook, May 16th, 1938. At the time, my parents owned a farm on Mill Road behind what's current Elks Club, north of the village of Red Hook. I was very fortunate because my parents, had some ambition for me. So from high school, I did pretty good in high school. And so I went on to college, and that was kind of assumed that I'd go to college. I went to a prestigious college, Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And then after college, I went right on to law school. So I went right away to Duke University School of Law in Durham, North Carolina. The dean of the law school actually came to Brown and recruited a couple of us to go to Duke. I fat, dumb, and happy, I went through an Ivy League school, and I went through law school and graduated with a Juris Doctor's degree in 1963. So I went in the FBI because I did then want to experience some real life experience and get away from the academic world. And that was a really good thing as I look back on it. So I was in the FBI as a special agent for 8 years, from 1963 till 1971. And I had good assignments in Springfield, Illinois, and Charlotte, North Carolina, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois for a while. I was in training school when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So what they did in November of 1963 was to marshal all of the personnel in the FBI and put you to work some way or another. At the time, though, I hadn't even been certified to shoot my pistol. I was in training, but I was still in training school. So they assigned the FBI recruits that were in school to a couple of military police, CID, the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army, and we would go with them to actually be bodyguards for a number of principal, officers in the Pentagon. That was my assignment. So we were sent to follow these generals and admirals and stuff for a few days to make sure that nobody was going to assassinate our major military personnel. So that was kind of fun, but the irony was they didn't give me a gun. I mean, they didn't trust me with a gun until they were ready to trust you. So we were at the mercy of these military guys who, of course, did have guns. That experience, kind of slapped you in the face, like it did most Americans when Kennedy went down. It was so, so sad because of the romance of the time and the hopefulness that everybody had in the administration, regardless of what political party. So that was interesting to be that close to the action. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, we were on the job. When Robert Kennedy was assassinated, we were having to investigate that. So when the kids, the civil rights cases, when those kids were murdered in Mississippi, that was something that involved everybody. And in the South, if you were assigned to an FBI office, you obviously had to work with the Klan and with the civil rights cases. And the Ku Klux Klan was a major part of our work in Charlotte because we covered North Carolina and South Carolina. And the Klan was very active in those areas. The Klan got very, very violent. I could tell you stories of going out at night and going through the woods and planting myself by some trees, scared as hell, by the way. But, watching the Klan have their, burn their cross and have their sessions at night when they had, I would say tom-toms, but there was some kind of drums that they would beat, just to get everybody riled up. But we would have had informants, among the Klan, so we had contact with them. We knew what was going on, but still, we had to actually observe it. So, it was always left to the local offices to come up with whatever you're going to do to solve the problem. So I frankly, I worked and I enjoyed working with a group of agents who put together programs to how do we solve the problem. They solved the problem by exposing a lot of the Klansmen to the fact that they were informants of the FBI. In other words, kind of a reverse psychology. You know, you would go to a gas station and the FBI guys, when I was in there, we always had suits and white shirts and dark ties and a handkerchief. I mean, that's the way J. Edgar Hoover wanted you to look. And we had hats and all that sort of thing. So, you know, we would go to the gas station and you'd go over to some guy at the gas station that you knew was a Ku Klux Klansman, very active in the Klan, and maybe you knew through your informants that they were about to go shoot up some house of a minority family, you know, in the community. So, you know, we'd go over and shake hands with him, pat him on the back, make believe like he was, you know, one of ours. And the next thing you know, the Clavern would meet that night and they'd have get a big fist fight and they'd throw him out. So that was a way of disintegrating the integrity of these clans in the South. You know, it was to show dissension among the ranks, so to speak. So we did that, and we used to do some creative things. You know, you call the guy's wife and tell him about some girlfriend and stuff like that. You know, I mean, some of that was a little bit close, but still it was, we thought, fair, and it was very effective. But it was like a psychological terror that we injected into the operation of the Ku Klux Klan, which I still would tell you I think was very effective, and it did a lot of good, believe me, because, you know, I mean, I did experience going to homes and carrying a little black child in my arms that was bleeding from buckshot wounds, you know, taking her to the ambulance. So, you know, the Klan was a very, very vicious, very horrific organization in the 1960s when I was down there. When you talk about the civil rights movement, you have to go back a little bit to my early years in the FBI when I was in Springfield. And just to remember how the technique of the FBI and how thorough they are. But we would have informants that were developed in the Chicago office of the FBI. So that was the metropolitan area. And there were a lot of African-American students from SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was one of our radical groups, you know, that was everybody, that it seemed to antagonize a lot of people. But we would get African-American students, young people from SNCC and other groups, and turn them into informants so that they were paid agents of the United States government. We would obtain from them information about who was doing what in the black community, but at the same time, we would take those informants and transport them down to the South so they could find out, again, what was going on in the different civil rights movements, in the voter registration movements, things like that, so that you had a balance of understanding. We also had informants in the Klan, of course, who would tell us things. But we used to transport students from, when I say we, agents in the Springfield office, we would drive them always at night from Chicago to Memphis, just below Memphis, when Tennessee crosses into Mississippi, because we had Illinois license plates that could not drive into the South. I mean, if you drove in the South with an Illinois license plate, the police were alerted, you know, that you were coming into their country almost like a foreigner to cause trouble. So we had to change license plates, put on Mississippi license plates, drive these informants just south of Memphis, again at night, have these clandestine meetings with other agents from Jackson, Mississippi, that would drive north and pick up the informants and then take them down to Mississippi and Louisiana and New Orleans, you know, for their work. Even today, I don't know how much has changed as far as, you know, whether we're still fighting the Civil War, whether there's really integration, whether there's segregation, and all those issues are not solved, although people 50 years ago thought they would be, but they haven't been. Well, my experience in the FBI, when I look back on it, I think I fit the profile where you were trained to do a job and you did it. Maybe you didn't think about it a lot in the terms as though you were a professor of sociology or psychology. In other words, I can remember a job when an airplane, a Piedmont Airlines plane went down in western North Carolina when I was at Charlotte. Again, you know, at night as a field relief supervisor, you get the phone call. And then you get the next phone call saying, this is a list of the people, because we had our agents there real quick, but they had to identify by rings and by a shoe and by a purse, you know, who these bodies were. And then we had to make the phone calls to those people and wake them up at night to tell them probably that their loved one had been killed in this airplane crash. So when you make 8 or 10 phone calls like that, you know, you have to do it without emotion. You can imagine you can't be crying and feel sorry for anybody. You have to do it like this is business. And that was the training. I would think, you know, you had to be less emotional about things and less philosophical and just do what you're supposed to do. Finally, in 1971, one summer when I was back here visiting with my mother, and you know, I interviewed with Al Rosenblatt, who was the district attorney of Dutchess County at the time. He was looking to expand the district attorney's office in Poughkeepsie in Dutchess County into a professional full-time staff. And so I was lucky enough again to happen to meet him and be available when he was looking for new assistant DAs. So he interviewed me and hired me as an assistant district attorney with Dutchess County. And so then I resigned from the FBI and moved back to Red Hook. So that's how I came back. You know, I was very fortunate to get into a job that I liked, and I was halfway decent at it. And so I was, I guess, successful for 32 years. And I had a lot of, you know, really good cases. You know, the Tawana Brawley was a famous civil rights case that wrecked Dutchess County back in the 80s, and this young, you know, African-American girl who claimed that she was raped and kidnapped by a white prosecutor, actually a prosecutor in our office. And so it was a long story. It was a long, very involved case. But I was responsible with that case. But anyway, I had a very good career in the DA's office, and again, I seemed to fit into that line of work. After I retired from the district attorney's office in 2002, I spent 10 years in a law firm, O'Neill and Burke in Poughkeepsie, which was a wonderful experience. First of all, I only worked 3 days a week, so it was semi-retirement, but I got to represent clients as a defense lawyer. And so that was a different exposure, and I enjoyed that, and it kept me busy. And then after I retired from that, I ran for public office in Red Hook and got elected as a town board member, and I'm in my 3rd term now. Well, if I were to wonder out loud, you know, what others would say of me or what I would say of myself, I don't know. I have a problem because I use this expression, being fat, dumb, and happy. And you know, I'll tell you this, when I was at Red Hook High School, class of 1956, a couple or 3 girls in my class put together our yearbook. And you know how you have an expression that fits every graduate? So the quote that they had for me was from Shakespeare, that thinking is but an idle waste of thought. So, you know, at the time, I was busy probably playing football, or I was with the student council and stuff. I didn't really have a whole lot to do with the yearbook. But ever since then, I've said to myself how smart those girls were, because that actually absolutely fits my personality. Thinking is but not a waste of time. So, you know, I deal with things that come to me. I solve problems. I react to matters that are factually presented to me, but I don't spend a lot of time just thinking idly about whatever is going on around me. So when I think about where I've been and what I've accomplished, I don't really find any fault. So, you know, I probably approach life right now the same way I did in 1956 when I got out of high school. I drive down Route 9 and go by my old farm and into the village. I feel pretty much the same as I did then as far as my personal satisfaction.
There's a man who leads a life of danger. To everyone he meets, he stays a stranger.